Long before that night in Kingman, Arizona, I already felt like I was carrying more than a 17-year-old should. My dad had left 3 months earlier, and the silence he left behind was louder than any fight we'd had before. My mom tried to fill it with work, overtime shifts at the dental office, late-night cups of coffee at the kitchen table. I filled it with music. That summer, every weekend seemed to bleed into concerts, desert shows, local bands whose names I'd forget the next day. Anything to drown out the way our house sounded when it was just the two of us eating dinner across from each other. Emily was my escape. She lived 3 blocks over, and when we were little, we'd sneak out to each other's porches in pajamas, whispering secrets we thought were huge. She always seemed lighter than me, like she could float out of her own problems by laughing at them. But that wasn't the truth. Her brother had walked out when she was 14 and never looked back. She didn't talk about him much except sometimes when she was tired or angry. I think she kept that wound folded deep inside. That night, July 26, 2014, we'd gone to a rock festival outside the city. We sang until our throats hurt, drank too much warm beer, and by midnight we were too exhausted to drive the 4 hours back home. Emily suggested we crash at the first place we found along Highway 93. The glowing sign of the Desert Star Motel came out of the dark like a beacon, buzzing pink and blue, half the letters flickering. It looked like something from an old postcard, only aged and tired. The lobby reeked of bleach, with a shadow of smoke underneath that bleach couldn't kill. The man behind the counter looked like he'd been working there since the 80s, a coffee stain blooming on his shirt pocket. He barely glanced at us when he slid the key across the counter. No ID check, no questions, just room 7. Emily carried her backpack like a joke was always hanging from her lips. God, this place smells like a grandma's closet. She laughed, flopping on the bed. The floral bedspread was stiff as cardboard. Don't say that, I muttered, tossing my shoes in the corner. My mom would freak out if she knew I stayed here. Then don't tell her, Emily grinned. She already thinks you're perfect. Perfect? The word caught in my throat. She thinks I'm the reason Dad left. Silence pressed down. Emily looked at the carpet, biting her lip. For a second I wished I could shove the words back inside me, but they hung there, ugly and raw. By 12:15 a.m., we were both restless. Emily grabbed the empty ice bucket and said she'd fill it. I stayed back, scrolling my phone, trying not to read my mom's last text again. Don't make the same mistakes I did. When the door banged open, Emily stood there pale as chalk, the bucket still empty, her hand trembling. Em? I sat up. What happened? Her voice cracked. We need to leave. Right now. What are you talking about? Her eyes darted toward the window like she expected something to appear. She stepped inside, shut the door behind her. There was a woman by the ice machine. She was... Emily's voice dropped. Her dress was covered in blood. She asked me if I'd seen her son, then she was just... gone. I laughed nervously, trying to shake it off. You're messing with me. Tell me you're messing with me. She shook her head hard. Do I look like I'm joking? I didn't answer. Because the truth was she didn't. I tried to convince myself Emily had been seeing things. We were tired, tipsy, the desert air thick with heat even past midnight. My brain wanted logic. Ghost stories belonged in movies, not at a motel with buzzing neon lights. But the way Emily's hands shook made my chest tighten. We can't just leave at 1 a.m, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's not safe. Unsafe is staying here with that thing, Emily snapped back, pacing the room. You always run away, Em. That's why your brother left. You push people away. The words shot out before I could stop them. Her face hardened, eyes bright with angry tears. At least I don't pretend everything's fine, like you do with your parents. The air in the room felt heavy. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then a shadow passed the window. Both of us froze. The door rattled, but it wasn't someone trying to open it. Just the sound of footsteps outside. A key scraped in another lock. I peeked through the curtains. The clerk walked down the row of rooms carrying a thermos. He glanced our way, then gave a half smile, like he knew something. We tried to laugh it off, but when he came closer, he slowed and said, "You saw her, didn't you? The lady in the bloodstained dress?" My stomach dropped. Emily gasped. "That's why we don't rent out that wing anymore," he added calmly, then kept walking. "What the hell?" Emily whispered. I didn't answer. My phone slipped in my hand, the screen lighting my face. I thought about calling my mom, but what would I even say? "Hey Mom, Dad left. I'm drinking beer in the desert. And by the way, we saw a ghost at some roadside motel?" She'd never forgive me. We packed in silence. Every zip of the backpack sounded like a scream. Emily shoved her shoes on without tying them. My fingers shook too much to fit the key in the lock, so she yanked the door open herself. The air outside smelled like hot asphalt and cigarette smoke. The buzzing neon flickered against the parking lot, where beer cans rolled with the wind. We didn't look back as we threw our bags in the car. The headlights carved the darkness, cutting through the desert night. Neither of us spoke until Kingman faded in the rearview mirror. Back home, I couldn't shake it. I told myself we'd been tired, drunk, dramatic. But the look on Emily's face wasn't something I could file under imagination, and the clerk's words, like it was routine, gnawed at me. A few days later, I sat in my room scrolling on my laptop. I typed Desert Star Motel Kingman, Arizona murder into the search bar. The first articles were old, the font grainy like scanned newspapers. 1987. A woman and her young son checked into the Desert Star. They never checked out. Days later, the woman's body was found near the ice machine, stabbed multiple times. Her son's body was never recovered. I felt cold all over. I texted Emily the link. She didn't reply. The next day, when I asked about it in person, she shrugged, changed the subject. Her laughter sounded forced. Whenever I pushed, she'd get sharp. "I don't want to talk about it, but I noticed things." When we drove anywhere near Highway 93, Emily would turn her head, eyes locked on the horizon, refusing to glance at the motel's sign. We graduated the next spring. Life pulled us in different directions: college, jobs, breakups. But that night never left me. Sometimes, when the house was too quiet, I'd hear echoes of Emily's voice trembling. She was asking if I'd seen her son. When Dad called once, out of the blue, asking to meet for lunch, I nearly said no. But I thought about the woman at the motel, about her son never found, about Emily and her brother, gone without a goodbye. People leave, and sometimes they don't come back. So I went. Dad was older, softer around the edges. We talked, awkward but real. I didn't forgive him that day, but I opened the door. Years later, when I drove through Kingman with my husband and our baby asleep in the back seat, I saw the neon sign again. Desert Star Motel. Still buzzing. Still flickering. My chest tightened. Emily and I hadn't talked in years. Life carried us apart. But when I saw that sign, I remembered her pale face, her shaking hands, her voice cracking. "We need to leave. Right now." I drove past without stopping. My son stirred in his car seat, and I thought about the boy who never made it home. I thought about the mother still wandering, asking strangers if they'd seen him. And I whispered to the night, "I'm sorry." Some places carry the weight of unfinished stories, and some people do too. We can ignore the shadows, pretend they aren't there, or we can listen to what they're warning us about. Fear isn't always weakness. It can be the instinct that saves us. When your gut tells you to leave, when someone you trust says, "We need to go," you don't wait for proof. You go. Because sometimes survival depends not on bravery, but on listening. When I think back to that night in upstate New York, I can still smell the rain. It wasn't the clean, earthy kind that comes in spring. This was October rain, cold, relentless, smelling of wet asphalt and dead leaves. I had been driving for hours, chasing nothing in particular except distance from a phone call I didn't want to remember. My sister's voice had cracked through the speaker, begging me to stay home. "Mom needs you. Stop running off every time things get hard." She said it like I was abandoning them, and maybe she was right. I hung up before I could hear the rest. The road blurred under my headlights. My GPS flashed warnings about flooded roads ahead, and by the time I saw the flicker of neon promising vacancy, I was too tired to argue with fate. I pulled into the lot of the Lakeview Motel, rain hammering on the roof of my car, puddles glowing red and blue under the buzzing sign. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of cigarettes and damp carpet. The man at the desk looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, his eyes swollen with purple shadows. He didn't greet me, didn't ask for ID, just slid a key across the counter with the number 4 stamped on a brass tag. The room was what you'd expect for $50 a night on Route 9. Floral curtains, a television older than me, a humming mini fridge, sheets that smelled like bleach fighting a losing battle. I dropped my duffel bag by the bed, kicked off my shoes, and sat down heavy. That's when I noticed the closet. Or more accurately, the closet door that had been nailed shut. Thick wooden planks crisscrossed over it, the nails bent and rusted, the boards splintered at the edges. I leaned closer and saw long gouges carved into the wood, deep scratches that ran downward like fingernails, or claws, had raked across it in desperation. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. I went back to the desk, dripping rain on the floor. "Hey, what's with the closet in room 4? It's boarded up like a crime scene." The clerk barely looked up. "Some things are better left shut." "That doesn't answer my question." He shrugged, lighting a cigarette with slow, tired fingers. "Room 4's all you got. Take it or leave it." I should have left, but I was too tired, too stubborn. I took it. And that's when everything began. Sleep didn't come easy. The rain kept at the roof and windows, steady as a drumbeat. I left the TV on for background noise, though the channels were mostly static. My head was full of my sister's words, her anger, her fear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom's thin face in a hospital bed. Guilt pressed on me heavier than the storm. Around 1 a.m., I was finally drifting, when a sound cut through the static and rain. Slow, deliberate, dragging. My eyes opened, heart thudding. The sound came again. It was coming from the closet. I told myself it was the storm, the pipes, anything but what it sounded like. Then I heard it clearly. 3 knocks. Slow, hollow raps on the other side of the boards. I sat up in bed, frozen. "It's just the storm," I whispered to myself. Just the storm. The knocks came again, louder this time. I stood, my feet bare on the creaking floor, and walked toward the closet as if pulled by something outside of myself. I pressed my ear against the boards. The wood was cold, and for a second all I heard was silence. Then came the whisper. "Please, let me out." The voice was hoarse, broken, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. My stomach lurched. I stumbled back, grabbed the chair by the desk, and wedged it under the doorknob, even though the planks already sealed it shut. I sat on the bed, knees pulled to my chest, staring at that closet like it might breathe. The whispers returned every few minutes, faint but insistent. Sometimes they sounded like a child, other times deeper, older. I didn't sleep. I just watched the closet until the gray light of dawn crept into the room. By morning, I felt hollowed out, my hands shaking as I carried my bag back to the desk. The clerk was there, smoking like always, his face a blank mask. "There's someone in that closet," I said, my voice breaking. I heard them. They were begging for help. He didn't look surprised, just tapped ash into an overflowing tray. "That closet hasn't been opened since 1984, best not to think about it." I slammed my hand on the counter. "Are you kidding me? Someone could be trapped in there." The clerk's eyes met mine for the first time. They were cold, flat. "If someone's still in there, they've been dead a long time." My throat closed up. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but something in his tone told me I wouldn't get any. I turned. pushed through the lobby door and stepped into the gray morning drizzle. My car was wet and waiting. I drove away fast, my knuckles white on the wheel. The motel faded in the rear view, but the whispers didn't. They followed me, curling into my ears, seeping into my thoughts. I told myself I'd forget, but I knew I wouldn't. Back home, I said nothing to my sister, nothing to Mom. What could I say? That I'd heard voices behind nailed boards, that someone long dead had whispered through the wood. They already thought I was selfish, a runaway. I wasn't about to hand them proof. But the memory lingered. At night, I'd hear knocks in the silence of my apartment, soft and patient. I'd check closets, cupboards, under the bed. Nothing. Still, I never shook the feeling something wanted out. Months passed. I went through old photos from that trip, editing them for a gallery show. Landscapes, rain-soaked roads, gas stations glowing under storm clouds. Then I saw one I didn't remember taking, the window of the motel room. My reflection stared back, tired and pale. But next to me, in the glass, was another face. A child's, wide-eyed, mouth open like a silent plea. I shut the laptop, heart racing, but the image was there, saved forever. Years later, I still think about the Lakeview Motel. I think about the nails rusting into wood, about the scratches dragging down like someone had fought until their fingers broke. I think about that whisper, soft as the rain outside. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it. Maybe exhaustion and guilt made me hear things. Maybe grief over my mom's slow decline played tricks on me. But then I look at that photograph, at the pale face in the glass, and I know. I've driven many roads since, taken photos in cities and deserts, crossed state lines chasing light. But I've never gone back to Route 9, and I never will. Because some doors, once shut, are better left closed. There are things in life we will never understand, shadows we can't explain. Curiosity can be dangerous when it ignores warning. Not every door is meant to be opened, and not every voice calling for help is what it seems. Sometimes the most important choice is the one to walk away, and to leave the past buried where it belongs. I was 19 the winter I worked nights at the Silver Pines Motel, a squat 2-story building just outside Boise. The job wasn't something I wanted, it was something I needed. My father had been laid off from his job at the lumberyard that fall, and my mom worked part-time at a diner off the highway. Bills piled up fast, and when I suggested I'd quit to focus on community college classes, Mom looked me dead in the eye and said, "Someone has to keep the lights on." That someone was me. The motel sat at the edge of town, sandwiched between a shuttered gas station and a stretch of pine woods. Trucks rumbled by at all hours, their brakes screeching in the cold air. The neon sign flickered between silver and pines, buzzing like a swarm of bees. The building smelled faintly of gasoline from idling rigs, mixed with pine needles that collected at the base of the doorways. My nights were long. I sat behind a cracked laminate counter, the space lit by one buzzing fluorescent light. My company was a small black and white security monitor, showing the second-floor hallway in grainy footage. Most nights, nothing happened. A family from Oregon might check in, a trucker would grumble about needing a wake-up call, and then the place would fall silent. But after a few weeks, I noticed something strange on that monitor. A shape, a shadow pacing the second floor, always stopping in front of room 6. At first I thought it was a glitch in the feed, the kind of static that comes from old wiring, but it wasn't static. The figure moved, slow and deliberate. It never left the frame, never came down the stairs. It was only there when no one else was. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. I was 19, underslept, trying to juggle night shifts with early morning classes. My eyes weren't to be trusted. Still, the more I watched, the more I noticed patterns. The figure always appeared around midnight, always turned toward room 6, always stood so still it looked like the tape had frozen. I didn't tell my boss. He was the kind of man who ignored complaints and handed out paychecks like they were charity. I didn't tell my mom either. She'd just remind me we couldn't afford for me to quit. So I said nothing and kept watching, waiting for something to break the pattern. And eventually, something did. It was a Tuesday night when a man checked into room 6. Middle-aged, traveling alone, carrying a single black suitcase. He signed the guest book with a shaky hand. Daniel, I think his name was, though it blurred together later. His eyes darted around the lobby like he was nervous about being followed. I didn't ask questions, just handed him his key. Around midnight, the phone at the front desk rang. I picked it up, expecting it to be someone asking for extra towels. "Someone's outside my door," a voice whispered. It was the man from room 6. They keep jiggling the handle. I can't sleep. My heart lurched. I glanced at the monitor. There it was. The shadow again, standing right in front of room 6, unmoving, its head tilted toward the door. "Stay inside," I told him, gripping the receiver tight. "Don't open it. I'll come check." I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and ran up the stairs. The carpeted hallway muffled my steps. When I rounded the corner, the hallway was empty. Silent. The air was cold enough to make my breath show. Room 6 sat at the far end. The door closed tight, the handle still. I raised my flashlight and shined it along the hallway. Nothing. No shadow, no figure. Just silence and the buzzing of the fluorescent light overhead. I knocked gently. "Sir? It's the front desk. Everything okay?" No answer. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. I pressed my ear against the door, but the room was silent. Too silent. Finally, I walked back downstairs, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But when I looked back at the monitor, my stomach turned cold. The shadow was there again, right in front of room 6. The next morning, housekeeping knocked on the lobby door. Mrs. Gomez, a quiet woman with kind eyes, looked pale. "Room 6, she said. "It's empty. The bed's unmade, but he's gone. His suitcase is still there. His wallet. Everything." I ran upstairs with her. The door to room 6 was unlocked. Inside, the bed was messy, the sheets tangled, the suitcase half unzipped on the floor. A wallet sat on the dresser, open to an ID card. But the man was gone. No sign of forced entry. No sign he'd left willingly. I told the owner, Mr. Krantz. He frowned, rubbed his chin, and muttered something about calling the police. But no police ever showed up, at least not while I was there. Instead, Krantz just told Mrs. Gomez to lock the door and not book it again until further notice. That night, I sat at the desk staring at the monitor, my hands trembling. Midnight came, and sure enough, the shadow appeared. But this time it wasn't pacing. It was standing still, just standing outside room 6, waiting. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't answer the phone when it rang once, then stopped. I just sat there frozen, listening to the hum of the light overhead, feeling like something unseen was pressing down on my chest. By the end of the week, Krantz had shut down the entire second floor. Renovations, he told the rare guests who asked, but no renovations ever happened. He simply kept it dark and empty. I told my mom what had happened, how a man vanished without a trace, how I'd seen something on the monitor. She sighed and shook her head. "You're too tired, Evan. You've been imagining things. Stop chasing shadows. We can't afford you quitting another job." I snapped at her. "I know what I saw. He was there one night and gone the next." Her face hardened. "Don't make trouble where there doesn't need to be any." So I stayed quiet. I worked my shifts, took my paychecks, and pretended nothing had happened. But I couldn't unsee the monitor, couldn't unhear the sound of that man's voice begging me to help. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night in my own bed, convinced I could hear footsteps outside my door, convinced that if I looked out into the hall, I'd see a shadow waiting. It's been years since I worked at the Silver Pines Motel. I've gone on to better jobs, gone to school, built a life. But I still dream about that place. I dream about the monitor, the flicker of static, the hallway frozen in black and white. In those dreams, room 6 is always there. The shadow is always there. But it isn't pacing anymore. It isn't waiting outside a door. It's closer. Always closer. I'll wake with the memory of cold air in my lungs, the feeling of someone standing right behind me. I'll sit up sweating, convinced I'll turn and see it. But I never do. I don't know what happened to the man in room 6. I don't know what the shadow wanted, or why it only appeared when no one else could see it. Maybe some things aren't meant to be understood. All I know is that the second floor of the Silver Pines has been dark ever since. And some nights when I drive past the highway where the neon sign still flickers, I feel the urge to look. But I never do. Because I know if I see that monitor in my mind again, I'll also see the shadow standing right behind me. Sometimes the weight we carry isn't just from the living, but from the echoes of the lost. Ignoring what we can't explain doesn't make it vanish. It only buries it deeper inside us. Silence can be as haunting as truth, and if we choose not to face the shadows around us, they find a way to follow us home. Some trips don't begin as adventures. Some start as an escape, or maybe as a distraction from wounds that never quite heal. That was the case with mine. In the spring of 2002, I was 22, fresh out of college, and tangled up in emotions I didn't want to name. My boyfriend, Jason, had convinced me we should take a road trip. See the country, he said. Get away from everything. He didn't say it outright, but he wanted to pull me away from my family, the family I'd never stopped fighting with. We had just left my father's house in Spokane that afternoon. The visit had gone about as poorly as I expected. My dad and I hadn't spoken in years, and when we finally sat down together, old arguments rose back up like they'd been waiting in the air all along. Words cut deep, and when I stormed out, Jason followed, jaw tight, hands gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary once we were back on the road. By the time night fell, silence sat between us heavier than the luggage in the back seat. Neither of us wanted to break it. Highway 12 was long and empty, surrounded by dark pine forest. We passed a handful of motels, most of them with flickering neon signs, but Jason kept driving until we saw one with an actual vacancy sign glowing steady. The Evergreen Motel wasn't much to look at. 2 stories of chipped paint, peeling wallpaper visible through the lobby window, and a sign that leaned slightly like it was tired of standing. The parking lot was empty but for one pickup truck. I should have been uneasy, but all I felt was exhaustion. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of burnt coffee and damp earth. A woman in a faded cardigan sat behind the desk, reading a newspaper under buzzing fluorescent lights. She hardly looked up as she slid us a key. Room 7. Jason muttered thanks, his voice rough from not speaking for hours. Our room was exactly what I expected. Floral curtains, an old box television with fake wood paneling, and sheets so thin I knew we'd be cold. Jason flicked on the TV to break the silence, flipping through channels until we landed on a sitcom rerun. Every channel worked except one. On that one, the screen was nothing but static, gray snow hissing faintly. Jason smirked, leaning against the dresser. Guess that's your premium channel. I snapped without meaning to. Not funny. Just leave it on something else. His smile faded. He changed the channel, but I caught a flicker of hurt in his expression. I didn't apologize. At the time, I was too tired to care. It was the rain that woke me. Light at first, just a tapping against the thin glass window, then heavier, drumming on the roof. I blinked in the dark, trying to get my bearings. Jason was snoring lightly beside me, the TV still glowing faintly at the foot of the bed. That's when I noticed the static. The sitcom had ended, but the TV hadn't shut off. Instead, the screen was filled with flickering gray snow, the kind that crawls and shifts like it's alive. I sat up, leaning closer, and my heart stuttered. There were shapes moving in the static, blurry silhouettes like people walking down a hallway. "Jason," I whispered, nudging his arm. "Jason, wake up. Look at this." He groaned, rubbed his eyes, and sat up. It's just static, Lauren. Go back to sleep. No, look. They're moving. We both stared at the screen. The shapes grew clearer the longer I watched, though never sharp enough to make out faces. They drifted back and forth like restless figures trapped in endless pacing. Then, slowly, one of them turned its head. I froze. It was impossible, but it looked like it had noticed us. "Jason," I whispered, my voice shaking. "It's looking at us." Jason's bravado crumbled. His jaw tightened, his arm stiff under my grip. We both stared as the figure stopped walking and stood still, facing the screen, facing us, and then the TV went black. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, suddenly, the room phone rang, just once. A sharp, jarring ring that made us both jump. Jason reached for the receiver with a shaky hand. "Hello?" There was no voice, just static. A faint, hollow breathing woven into the hiss. He slammed it back down, his face pale. Neither of us said a word. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, we packed our bags in silence. Jason tried to act like nothing had happened, but I could see it in the way his hands shook when he zipped up his duffel. My own chest felt heavy, like I'd been carrying a weight I couldn't name. In the lobby, the same woman sat behind the desk, cardigan buttoned tight. Jason slapped the key onto the counter, his voice sharp. "What the hell is wrong with that TV?" "We saw something, someone, in the static." The woman sighed, folding her newspaper as if she'd been expecting this. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "That set's been broken since '94. A guest died watching it. Heart attack, they said. But some folks think he never stopped watching." I felt the blood drain from my face. "We saw him," I whispered. "I swear to God, we saw him." The woman only shook her head and slid our receipt across the counter. Jason muttered curses under his breath, but I barely heard him. My mind kept replaying that moment when the figure turned its head, when it stopped moving and fixed itself on us. We left without another word. In the car, Jason tried to joke, tried to rationalize. It was just interference, old wiring, maybe another channel bleeding in. His words tumbled out too fast, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I stared out the window. The pine trees blurred into dark green walls. "It looked at us," I said quietly. Jason didn't answer. The silence stretched. Weeks later, after we'd returned home and tried to resume normal life, I still couldn't shake it. Sometimes late at night when the TV in my apartment glitched for just a second, I swore I saw shapes flickering in the corner of my vision, silhouettes pacing, and the phone. Twice in the dead of night it rang once and then went dead. I never answered. I couldn't bring myself to. Jason stopped talking about it. He didn't like when I brought it up, said I was feeding the paranoia. But I could see it in him too, the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way his eyes darted when the screen fuzzed for a moment. The Evergreen Motel stayed with us long after we left it behind. Years have passed since that night, but I still remember the hiss of static, the way the figure paused and turned its faceless head toward me. Sometimes I wonder if it really was just my imagination, shaped by exhaustion and grief after fighting with my father. Maybe the shadow was just my mind projecting loneliness. But then I remember the phone, the sharp single ring in the silence, the faint breathing on the other end. That wasn't in my head. That was real. I've driven through Montana since, though never down Highway 12. I don't want to see the Evergreen's faded sign, don't want to test if the TV is still there, still glowing with gray snow and restless shapes. Some nights, when I wake to silence broken only by the hum of my own television, I feel the urge to turn it off just in case. I don't want to see anything moving in the static, and if the phone rings only once, I never answer, because I know what I saw, and I know he saw me too. Not everything broken should be fixed. Some things, once touched by tragedy, hold on to what they've taken. Curiosity can cross a line, and when you peer too closely into the static just might peer back. I was 32 years old and still living out of duffel bags when I drove into Riverside. Most people my age were building families, saving for houses, locking themselves into careers. Me? I was chasing cities like they were notches on a belt, telling myself I was a traveler, an explorer, someone who couldn't be tied down. That was the story I gave to others, but if I'm honest, it was just a way to cover the fact that I couldn't stop running. It started after my father died 2 years earlier. He had a heart attack in the middle of the night, and I was halfway across the country when Anna, my sister, called. She called 3 times, and I ignored it. I was hiking in the Smoky Mountains, trying to disconnect from the world. By the time I picked up, it was too late. I didn't even make the funeral. The truth is, I could have driven all night and maybe made it. But I didn't. That's the memory that eats at me. I left Anna to handle everything alone, and she hasn't really forgiven me. Since then, staying anywhere feels like punishment. Sitting still means remembering. Moving at least keeps me numb. I've held jobs just long enough to keep gas in the car. Warehouse work, deliveries, freelance editing jobs done in motel rooms. Friends faded away. Relationships collapsed. But the road didn't judge me. It just kept stretching out, mile after mile. Before Riverside, I called Anna. She laughed, but not in the good way. One day, she said, "You'll stop running and actually settle down." "I'm not running," I told her. "I just like moving. Staying feels worse." She wanted to argue. I could hear it in her breath, but I hung up before she got the words out. Because I already knew she was right. Riverside was the last major city on my list. It felt symbolic, though I couldn't tell you why. The Grandview Inn was a mid-range roadside place that pretended it wasn't tired. From the highway, the neon sign glowed pink and blue, buzzing faintly like a fly trapped against glass. Inside, lemon cleaner couldn't hide the mildew soaked into the carpet. A ceiling fan ticked overhead, slow and uneven. The woman behind the desk introduced herself as Clara. She looked mid-40s, kind eyes but worn down from long hours. She slid a brass key across the counter and said, "Room 214, elevators to your left. Welcome." "Thanks," I said, lifting my suitcase. That's when I noticed him. A man in a denim jacket leaning against the lobby wall. He looked a little older than me, maybe late 30s, with the easy grin of someone who wanted to be trusted. When he saw me struggling with the bag, he stepped forward. "Need a hand?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "Appreciate it." He carried it like it weighed nothing, chatting as we went up the stairs. He introduced himself as Mark, joked about motel coffee being strong enough to take rust off a bumper. I laughed politely, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. He didn't leave right away when we reached my door. He looked at the number, let his eyes linger a second too long, then finally nodded and walked away. I unpacked, trying to shake it off. But a knock came 20 minutes later. Clara stood there. Her voice was low. "That man who helped you, he isn't a guest here. He hangs around sometimes. Please be careful." Her words landed like a weight. I thanked her, but my gut tightened. I told myself I'd forget it. I went out that night, walked downtown where food trucks lined the street, music spilled out of bars, neon painted everything alive. For a while, the warning faded, but when I came back, the silence in the room felt too thick. At 9:45, a knock rattled the door. "Housekeeping," a man's voice said. I froze. Housekeeping doesn't come at night. My eye pressed to the peephole. A man in a hoodie stood outside. No cart, no uniform, just stillness. I didn't say a word. I backed away and grabbed the phone. My fingers shook dialing the front desk. Clara picked up on the second ring. "Did you send housekeeping?" I whispered. "No," she said firmly. "We don't send staff this late. Keep your door locked." That certainty hollowed me out. Whoever was out there wasn't supposed to be. I waited. The knock came again, softer this time. Then silence. For nearly an hour, I sat on the bed, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Every creak of the walls made me jump. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me down. At 2:30, the sound snapped me awake. The doorknob turned, slowly, carefully. Then it clicked. The door eased open. A figure slipped in, face hidden behind a black mask. He lunged. I shouted, kicked, but he pinned me down, his weight crushing my chest. The smell of sweat and something metallic filled my nose. "Stay quiet," he hissed. His voice was low, distorted. "Or I'll make you." I thrashed harder, panic burning through me. My foot caught the lamp. It crashed to the floor, shattering loud in the quiet. The intruder froze. Footsteps pounded in the hall. Clara's voice called out. The man bolted, sprinting through the door and down the stairwell. I stumbled upright, shaking. Clara and another staffer rushed in. "Call the police," I gasped. Officers arrived minutes later. Radios crackled as they examined the lock. One of them frowned. "No forced entry," he said. "This was opened with a key. A master key." The thought made bile rise in my throat. I saw Mark in my head, his eyes flicking to the room number. It was him, I told them. Mark. He knew my room. But when they searched, he was gone. No ID, no car in the lot, no record, nothing. The officers took my statement, promised to investigate, but I could hear it in their voices. They didn't expect much. By dawn, I sat in the lobby clutching coffee. Clara apologized over and over. "We'll comp your stay," she said. "Free nights for life if you want. This has never happened before." Her voice trembled. I believed her fear, but the damage was done. I called Anna. My throat cracked. "You were right," I told her. "I'm running, and I almost didn't make it out this time." She was quiet a long moment, then soft. "Then stop running, Ethan. Come home." I didn't answer, because the truth was already inside me. From now on, every motel room would carry the sound of that knock. The police never called back with news. Days passed, then weeks. I stayed in Riverside longer than planned, but not at the Grand View. I moved to a chain hotel across town where locks beeped with cards and cameras lined the halls. Even then, I barely slept. Every noise pulled me awake, convinced someone was at the door. Travel didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like a curse. The road had always numbed me, but now it stalked me. Every time I checked into a motel, I saw Mark's grin. Every key in my hand felt like an invitation to danger. I tried to keep moving, San Diego, Tucson, Phoenix, but the same pattern followed. I'd lie in bed, eyes wide, listening. Shadows under the door looked like feet. Creaks in the ceiling felt like someone climbing in. My chest clenched until morning. One night in Tucson, a knock came at 11 p.m. My whole body went cold. "Pizza delivery," a man's voice said. I hadn't ordered food, I didn't answer. He knocked again, harder. My hands shook as I dialed the front desk. The clerk told me no one had been sent. By the time security checked, the hallway was empty. That was the moment I realized it didn't matter if it was real or not. My mind had trapped me. The road wasn't wide anymore. It was a narrow hallway, every door hiding danger. I called Anna again. She tried to sound patient, but I heard the worry underneath. "Ethan, you need to stop. You're not living. You're punishing yourself." "I can't just stop," I told her. "If I stop moving, I'll drown." "You're already drowning," she said. Her words clung to me. I thought about coming home, but home didn't feel real anymore. The last place I'd lived longer than a month was with a girlfriend who left me because she said I treated her like a layover. She wasn't wrong. I drifted through cities, filling notebooks with lists of places I'd been. They used to make me proud. Now they looked like evidence of a crime. Every line a place I had escaped to, instead of facing the truth. The image of the masked intruder haunted me, but so did something else. The way Mark had smiled. Casual, polite, almost friendly. It reminded me that danger doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it looks like help carrying your bag up the stairs. That thought burned deep. I replayed the moment 100 times. If I hadn't needed help, if I hadn't let him close, maybe he wouldn't have known my room. Or maybe he would have found out anyway. The police never found him. Or maybe they never really looked. I'll never know. One night in Nevada, I stood outside another motel door, key in hand, and couldn't go in. My chest felt tight, my palms slick. I sat in the car all night instead. It hit me then. The road had stopped being a choice. It had turned into a trap. I finally drove back toward home, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't keep going. I called Anna from a rest stop outside Sacramento. My voice cracked. "You still got room for me?" She was silent a moment, then said, "Always." When I pulled into her driveway 2 days later, she was waiting. She hugged me tighter than she ever had before. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and books. It felt still, solid. My chest loosened for the first time in years. "I don't know if I can stay," I admitted. "You don't have to know," she said. "Just stop running for now." That night, I lay awake in her guest room, listening. No knocks came, no footsteps, just quiet. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the first step. Running from guilt doesn't erase it. It only deepens the shadows we carry. Healing begins when we stop moving long enough to face what hurts, and when we allow the people who love us to help us stand still. I used to think driving at night was the closest thing to freedom I'd ever have. Roads stretched out like endless ribbons, headlights carving tunnels through the dark, radio humming low enough to keep me awake, but soft enough to let me drift into my own head. But freedom, I've learned, comes with a price. For me, that price was exhaustion, loneliness, and a constant ache in my chest that came from carrying everyone else's burdens. My name's Daniel Harper, 29 years old, delivery driver by necessity, not by choice. I didn't dream of delivering burgers and pizzas at 2 a.m. when I was a kid. Back then, I dreamed of playing guitar in smoky bars, maybe one day recording an album. But when Dad died of a stroke 3 years ago, dreams turned into overdue bills, medical debt, and a younger brother who couldn't seem to stay out of trouble. Mom did her best. She still worked part-time at the library, but she was tired, her face lined with years of worry. After Dad's funeral, she leaned on me. I leaned back too, but instead of finding comfort, I found more weight. My brother Kevin was 22 and already deep into a cycle of borrowing, gambling, and lying. I should have cut him off, but blood is blood, and every time he looked at me with those desperate eyes, I caved. That's how I ended up taking a Friday night shift I wasn't supposed to work. Kevin needed money. Again. And I swapped with a coworker, figuring the overtime might keep the lights on at his apartment. Before I left the house, Mom called. She always called when she couldn't sleep. "Danny," she said, voice soft but sharp at the edges, "you're never home anymore. Your brother's not your responsibility." I sighed, rubbing my face. "Somebody has to step up, Mom. Dad's gone, bills don't pay themselves." "But at what cost? You look more like a stranger in this house than a son." Her words stung because they were true. I didn't feel like her son anymore. I felt like a ghost passing through, always tired, always rushing to the next stop. But I told her what I always told her, that it'd get better, that I just needed time. Then I hung up before the conversation dug too deep. That night, my route led me to the Redwood Pines Motel just outside the city. It wasn't a bad place, not exactly, but it wasn't the kind of place you'd choose if you had better options. The Italian diner next to it stayed open late for truckers and insomniacs, and that's where I picked up the steaming bag of spaghetti and garlic bread for some night owl in a rental house 5 miles away. The rain hadn't let up all night. My wipers squeaked against the glass as I pulled onto the long stretch of highway leading away from the motel. The asphalt gleamed silver, reflecting the headlights like a mirror. The night felt emptier than usual, as if the world had gone still just for me. 10 minutes into the drive, it happened. A figure appeared out of nowhere, dead center in the lane, arms flailing, stumbling, desperate. I slammed the brakes, my chest lurching into the wheel. The man staggered closer, rain plastering his hoodie to his body. He slapped both hands against my window, shouting, "Out of gas, buddy! Help me out now!" My heart hammered. Dad's voice echoed in my head from years ago. Never stop on an empty road at night. If something feels off, it probably is. Everything about him felt wrong. His eyes darted too quickly, his movements too erratic, his voice more demanding than pleading. I shook my head, muttered under my breath, "Not tonight, man. Not tonight," and eased the car forward, veering around him. I didn't look back. Not yet. Relief washed over me as I drove past him, but it was thin and brittle like ice over a pond. My knuckles stayed white on the steering wheel. The rain pounded harder, drowning out everything except the steady thump of my heart. A mile down, I spotted something that made my chest seize up. A blue pickup truck sat parked crooked near an abandoned gas station. Its engine was off, but the driver's door hung wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. My first thought was, that was his truck. My second thought was, this was no coincidence. I pressed the gas a little harder, trying to outrun the dread curling in my stomach. I told myself to focus on the delivery, drop off the food, collect the tip, and get the hell home. At the rental house, I forced a smile for the guy in sweatpants who took the bag of pasta and handed me a crumpled $5. "Thanks, man," I mumbled, retreating to my car. The moment I slid into the driver's seat, my stomach flipped. Headlights flared from across the street. The blue pickup sat there now, engine humming, windshield wipers sweeping in rhythm with mine. And in the driver's seat, the man from the road. He didn't move, didn't gesture, just stared at me through the sheets of rain, his face shadowed but his presence sharp as a blade. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed Mom. She answered on the second ring. "Ma," I whispered. "I think someone's following me." Her voice shot from groggy to panicked. "Danny? What do you mean? Where are you?" "I'm trying to drive home, but this guy, he's just sitting there staring at me." "Call the police," she cried. "Don't play hero, just get home safe." "I'm trying," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "But he's moving closer." The truck's headlights brightened as he rolled forward. My pulse spiked. I threw the car into gear and sped off, windshield wipers struggling against the storm. Every turn I made, the truck mirrored. Every lane change, every detour. He was right there, stalking me. Finally, he roared ahead and swerved sideways, blocking the entire road. Tires screeched against wet asphalt. My car fishtailed, skidding to a halt inches from his bumper. The man leapt out, slamming his fists against my window, screaming words I couldn't even make out. My phone slipped from my hand, Mom's voice faint and frantic in the background. Then out of the darkness, flashing red and blue lights filled the night. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop behind me, boxing the pickup in. Doors flew open, officers shouting commands I couldn't process. The man froze, then bolted, trying to climb back into his truck. Within seconds, he was wrestled to the ground, his face pressed into the slick pavement, wrists cuffed tight. I sat trembling, glass shards on my lap where he'd slammed his fist hard enough to crack the window. My breath came in short bursts. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. An officer tapped my door. "Sir? You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't. Not by a long shot. The night blurred after that. Reports were taken, questions asked. They searched the man's truck and found rope, duct tape, alcohol, and a pair of handcuffs. The sight of it made my stomach turn. He wasn't looking for gas. When they finally let me go, it was nearly dawn. I sat alone in the motel break room, staring at the coffee machine, my phone heavy in my palm. Mom's number glowed on the screen. I pressed call. "Danny?" she answered, voice breaking. "You were right," I said, tears spilling. "Maybe I have been a stranger at home, but if I didn't stop tonight, it's because I wanted to live long enough to come back." I didn't drive for 3 days after that. The car sat in the motel lot while I slept fitfully. jumping at every knock on the door. When I finally got behind the wheel again, the roads didn't feel free anymore. They felt dangerous, haunted by headlights that seemed too close, by shadows moving where they shouldn't. I kept replaying it in my head. The man's fists on my window, the hollow look in his eyes, the sound of Mom crying through the phone. For years I'd thought my biggest burden was Kevin, or maybe Mom's disappointment. But now I realized the real weight was the way I'd treated life like something disposable. Nights blurred into mornings, and I was always chasing the next dollar, the next excuse to stay away from home. I called Kevin, told him I couldn't keep bailing him out. For once, I meant it. He got angry, cursed me out, hung up, but I didn't call back. The night at Redwood Pines Motel changed me. It stripped away the illusion that running myself ragged was noble. It showed me how close I'd come to losing everything without ever realizing what mattered most. When I finally drove home, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Mom stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. When she saw me, she broke into tears. I hugged her tighter than I had in years. "I'm done running, Ma," I whispered. That night, I sat at our kitchen table, guitar on my lap, strumming the chords I'd abandoned. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was honest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Sometimes survival isn't about escaping the danger in front of us, but the patterns that lead us into it. Family, love, and presence matter more than running on empty for people who drain you. And when life gives you a second chance to come home alive, you take it before it's too late. I never meant to run this far. Not from home, not from Christmas, and certainly not from myself. But when December rolled around in 2019, I couldn't face another holiday in my father's house, surrounded by questions I couldn't answer and expectations I couldn't meet. So I packed my sketchbooks, my laptop, and just enough clothes to get me through a week. And I drove up into the mountains of Washington until the roads grew quiet and the snow deepened around me. I'd been a freelance illustrator for nearly 10 years, scraping together a living through commissions, magazines, and online clients. People said I was lucky, working from anywhere, free from the 9-to-5 grind. But they didn't see the reality. Long nights, inconsistent pay, and the gnawing sense that no matter how many pieces I finished, I was always behind. Add to that a recent breakup with a man who said I was too closed off, and the endless pressure from my father to settle down, and I was unraveling. When I saw the vacancy sign glowing outside a roadside motel outside Leavenworth, I pulled in on instinct. The clerk handed me a key to cabin 6, a small place set apart from the others, rustic with wood-paneled walls and a stone fireplace that smelled faintly of pine smoke. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine for the week. The first night I called my dad. He never let me forget who I used to be. The girl with straight A's, the girl who could have been a lawyer or a doctor. "Christmas is in 2 weeks, Claire," he said after I told him where I was. "You think running off to some cheap motel is the answer?" "It's not about you, Dad. I just need space to think." "You've been needing space for 5 years. When are you going to stop running?" I couldn't answer. I hung up, staring at the quiet cabin walls, wondering if maybe he was right. The next morning, the snow was falling so heavy it muted every sound. I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee, hugging it to my chest. And that's when I saw them. Footprints in the untouched snow. They weren't mine. They were larger, heavier. They led across my porch and down the side of the cabin, disappearing into the woods. I stood frozen, breath fogging the air, my skin prickling despite the cold. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a hiker passing through, maybe maintenance. But deep down, unease planted itself in me. A seed waiting to grow. The days passed in a blur of sketches and half-finished emails to clients. I tried to convince myself I'd come here to work, to heal, to think. But every night when the snow fell thicker and the forest grew darker, I couldn't shake the memory of those prints. On the third morning, I stepped outside again. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, smoothing the world like a clean page. And yet, there they were. New prints. Not one set, but two, circling the cabin. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Whoever had been here had walked slowly, deliberately. They hadn't knocked, hadn't made a sound. They had just been there. I called my friend Megan. "I swear someone's coming here at night," I whispered into the phone. "You always imagine the worst, Claire," she said. "Maybe it's maintenance." "At midnight? In a storm?" She laughed nervously. "You're just wound up, you need sleep." But I knew sleep wasn't coming easy. That night I stayed up by the fire, sketchbook in hand, trying to distract myself. My pencil scraped across paper as the clock crept past 2 a.m. Then I heard it. Crunch, crunch. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. My heart stopped. I held my breath, listening. They paced back and forth, then paused. The silence pressed heavy on my ears. I grabbed the fireplace poker, knuckles white, waiting for the knock that never came. Minutes crawled by. Then, a sudden thump inside the hallway. I spun around, blood draining from my face. The hallway light flickered once, twice, then steadied. And in that split second of shadow, I saw something, someone, rush toward me. A dark figure, swift and silent, moving with intent. I screamed, the sound tearing my throat raw. The poker slipped from my hands and clattered against the hearth. Panic surged through me. I bolted for the door, barefoot, snow biting into my skin as I stumbled into the night. I didn't look back, not once. I sprinted across the frozen ground to my car, fumbling with the keys, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst. Somehow, my shaking hands found the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the swirling snow. I tore down the path toward the motel's main office, tires skidding on the icy road. When I reached it, I leapt out, pounding on the glass. The night manager's eyes widened when he saw me. He opened the door, ushered me inside, and locked it behind me. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight. "Someone was in my cabin," I gasped. "I saw them. I heard them." He didn't argue. He grabbed the phone and called the sheriff. But the storm had slowed everything. It was over an hour before the police arrived. By then I was curled up in a blanket, shaking so hard I couldn't hold a cup of tea. When they finally searched the cabin, the officer returned with a grim face. "Window by the fireplace was cracked open," he said. "Muddy boot prints through the kitchen, down the hallway, whoever it was. They were moving room to room, searching." My stomach lurched. I was in the living room, drawing. The officer's eyes softened. "If you'd stayed even half a minute longer..." He didn't finish. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even close my eyes. Every sound became a threat. The creak of the office walls, the wind rattling the glass, the scrape of branches against the roof. I called my dad. For the first time in years, my voice cracked. "You were right," I whispered into the phone. "I've been running. But tonight, I don't know what I was running from, or what was running toward me." There was silence on the line. Then his voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Claire, come home." The officers stayed until morning, combing the woods, but whoever had been there was gone. No footprints remained. The snow had covered everything by dawn. It was as if the figure had vanished into the storm, leaving only the memory of their presence behind. I checked out of the motel that afternoon. The clerk offered another cabin, said they'd refund my stay, but I couldn't. I couldn't step foot back in that room. The road back to the city felt endless, but at least it was moving me away from the cabin, from the silence, from the footprints circling in the snow. Weeks passed, but the memory didn't fade. At night, I'd wake to the imagined sound of footsteps outside my window. Sometimes I'd dream of snow crunching beneath boots, of shadows slipping between trees. I went home for Christmas. For the first time in years, I sat across the table from my father, his eyes searching mine. We didn't talk about the fight. We didn't talk about the cabin. But when he squeezed my hand, I let him. I realized then that running hadn't given me peace. It had only left me exposed, alone, vulnerable, and blind to the dangers I couldn't face on my own. The cabin stood empty after that night, the manager told me later. They couldn't rent it out again. Too many people said it felt wrong. But for me, the memory lives on in a different way. It isn't just fear anymore. It's a reminder, a warning. Because sometimes the thing you're running from isn't your family or your past. Sometimes it's something darker, something that waits for you in the quiet places where no one can hear you scream. Running from life doesn't protect you. It only isolates you, leaving you vulnerable to dangers you never imagined. Facing the people who love you, even with all their flaws, is often safer than facing the silence of the world alone. I never thought I'd live to see 62 and still be chasing the ghosts of family road trips. But that summer of 2006, I insisted we go. My son Michael argued against it from the start, said the car was too old, the trip too long, and the kids too restless. But I had my reasons. My husband, God rest him, used to pile us into the station wagon every July and head for the shore. We'd argue, we'd get lost, but we'd laugh too. I wasn't ready to give up on that tradition. Michael was 38, tired from work and too quick to sigh at me. His wife Laura tried to keep the peace, though I could see she thought I was being stubborn. Emily was 12, already rolling her eyes like a teenager, and Ben was 9, with a wild imagination that made him afraid of shadows on the wall. They were the reasons I pushed for the trip. I wanted them to know life outside of televisions and video games. I wanted them to have stories like the ones I still carried from my youth. The drive was harder than I admitted. Traffic piled up, the air conditioner coughed, and the car threatened to overheat more than once. By the time we took a wrong exit near Trenton, the sun had gone down and tempers had worn thin. That's how we ended up at the Willow Pines Motel, a place I'd never have chosen if I wasn't so desperate to get the kids into bed. The neon sign flickered like it could give out any moment. Paint peeled from the 2-story building and the office door creaked when Michael pushed it open. The room smelled faintly of mildew and disinfectant. Emily wrinkled her nose the second we walked in. "Grandma, this place is creepy," she whispered. "It's just for one night, sweetheart," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Tomorrow we'll be at the beach." Michael muttered under his breath, "If the car doesn't overheat again. I told you this road trip was a bad idea." I snapped before I could stop myself. "Your father used to take us on trips like this. Not everything has to be perfect, Michael." Laura gave him a look that told him to let it go. He did, but I knew the argument would circle back before long. That night, the walls echoed with laughter from rowdy guests next door. The kids tossed and turned. Twice, I thought I heard footsteps outside our door, but when I looked through the peephole, the walkway was empty. I told myself I was being jumpy. At 12:45, just as the children finally drifted off, a knock rattled the door so loud it jolted me upright. Michael froze, eyes wide. "Don't answer it," he whispered. But the knock came again, harder this time. Then a voice, calm, older, steady. "Sir, ma'am, we need to come in. You have something of ours." Michael and I locked eyes, both of us confused and alarmed. Laura whispered, "Maybe the front desk? Did we take the wrong room?" Michael called through the door. "You've got the wrong room. Please leave." Silence for a moment. Then another voice, deeper, rougher, snapped, "Open up! Now!" A fist slammed against the doorframe so hard it rattled. I herded the kids toward the bathroom. Emily clung to my arm, eyes wide with fear. "Emily! Ben! Go with your dad! Stay quiet!" I hissed. "Grandma, what's happening?" Emily whispered. "Nothing if we stay smart," I told her. "Just listen." Michael stayed planted by the door, fists clenched, ready to protect us if he had to. Laura clung to his arm, whispering, "Don't." Then came the sound that made my blood run cold, a metallic click. A gun pressed against the doorframe. The door swung open slowly, and 4 figures stepped inside. 3 young men, broad-shouldered, tense, their faces hard with anger, and behind them, the leader. Older, silver hair, eyes sharp as knives. His suit was too fine for this place. He looked around like he already owned the room. "Check there," he said, pointing to the nightstand. We just checked in," I stammered, my voice trembling. "There's nothing here," one of the young men sneered. "Don't lie. It was left in this room." They began tearing through everything, drawers, suitcases, even the kids' backpacks. One of them flipped the mattress. Another smashed the lamp in frustration. Emily started to cry, and Ben whispered, "I told you this place was scary." The leader turned toward the children, his expression strangely calm, almost polite. "Kids don't lie. Did you see anything? Maybe under the bed? Maybe in the bathroom?" They shook their heads furiously. "Please," I begged, stepping forward despite my fear. "Stop scaring them. We don't have what you're looking for." The leader's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then pray we believe you. Because if you did, it would be the last mistake of your lives." The room froze under his words. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and Emily's muffled sobs. Michael stood rigid, torn between rage and fear. But he didn't move. The gun aimed at his chest made sure of that. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the tension broke. The men stopped searching. The leader nodded once, and they began backing toward the door. "If it turns up," he said evenly, "if you find it later, you will bring it to us. We'll know if you don't." And just like that, they were gone. Their footsteps echoed down the walkway, then silence swallowed the night. A moment later, we heard the roar of a car engine. None of us moved until the sound faded. Then the kids collapsed into tears, and Laura hugged them tight. Michael swore under his breath, pacing the room. "Call the police," I told him. My voice shook, but it carried the weight of command. "Now!" The officers arrived half an hour later, summoned also by a guest who had heard the commotion. They searched, but there was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing but broken furniture and shaken nerves. I tried to explain about the older man, the way he looked at the children, the way he spoke like he already knew something. The officer nodded, but his eyes told me he thought it was a simple break-in gone strange. But I knew better. As I gathered the children close, I noticed something beneath the nightstand. A folded piece of paper tucked almost out of sight. My hands shook as I picked it up. In sharp black ink, the words read, "Not yours to keep." I didn't show it to the police. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what it meant, or maybe I just didn't want the children to see it. But I folded it into my pocket, and it burned there the rest of the night. We didn't sleep. Not one of us. The kids sat huddled between me and Laura on the bed, jumping at every sound from outside. Michael paced by the door, clutching the phone, daring anyone to come back. When morning came, we checked out without breakfast. The manager raised his eyebrows when he saw the state of the room, but the police had already spoken to him. He didn't ask questions. He just slid the bill across the counter and muttered something about rough clientele. We drove in silence for miles. The kids dozed, but I couldn't close my eyes. That folded paper still sat heavy in my pocket. By the time we reached the shore, the sun was shining, and the world looked ordinary again. But none of us could shake the feeling. Emily refused to sleep alone that night. Ben insisted the men would come back. Michael swore he'd never stay in another roadside motel again. I wanted to believe it was over, that it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But I knew deep down the look in that man's eyes wasn't about mistakes. It was a warning. Years passed, but the memory never faded. Emily told me once, long after she'd grown, that she still dreamed about that night. Not the gun, not the smashed lamp, but the way the older man looked at her, smiling faintly, like he already knew her future. I never told her about the note. I never told anyone. It stayed hidden in an old box of photographs, folded and yellowing with time. Every so often I'd take it out and stare at the words, written in that sharp hand. Not yours to keep. I don't know what they were searching for. Maybe drugs. Maybe money. Maybe something hidden in that room long before we got there. All I know is we were caught in someone else's game, and we walked away only because they allowed it. I still believe we were spared that night. For reasons I'll never understand, they left us alive. And that thought has haunted me more than anything else. Life has a way of reminding us how fragile our safety really is. We spend so much time worrying about the little things, traffic, arguments, imperfect plans, when danger often hides in the unexpected places, waiting without warning. The lesson I carry from that night is simple. Hold tight to the people you love, because in the end, they are the only thing worth protecting when everything else falls apart. I used to think paranoia was a curse. My wife, Hannah, said it was my worst quality. Sophie, our 14-year-old, called it my dad's superpower. Lily, who was only 10, didn't understand it at all. She just wanted me to relax, to laugh, to be the kind of dad who could fall asleep in the middle of a Christmas movie without checking every door lock twice. But I wasn't built that way. I work in IT, and when you spend 15 years digging through security breaches, phishing scams, and broken firewalls, you stop believing in accidents. People get sloppy. Systems get sloppy. And someone, somewhere, always takes advantage of it. That was the weight I carried on December 23, 2018, when we pulled into the Redwood Motel Lodge just outside Cork, Ireland. It had snowed half the day, the roads slick with slush. The girls were exhausted from the long flight from Melbourne, cranky from jet lag and sugar, and Hannah was humming Silent Night like it would erase the tension in the car. All I wanted was a hot shower, a bed that didn't squeak, and 4 solid walls that would keep us safe. The motel looked nothing like the glossy photos online. The neon sign buzzed, flickering against the swirling snow, and the parking lot was nearly empty. "Room 14, the clerk said, sliding a metal key across the counter. His hands trembled. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was something else. Inside, the carpet smelled faintly damp, the heater rattled, and the wallpaper peeled at the corners. Sophie groaned, dragging her suitcase across the floor. "Seriously, Dad? This is the storybook Christmas you promised?" "It's just for a couple nights," I muttered. "Then we'll find someplace better." At dinner in the cafe, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Hannah teased me about the Wi-Fi password I insisted on writing down. "You can't treat every motel like a crime scene, Mark," she said, rolling her eyes. I gave her a thin smile, but the truth was I couldn't help it. And when the girls went to bed that night, snuggled under lumpy blankets, I opened my laptop and did what I always do. I checked the network. That's when I saw it. An unfamiliar device. Cam 014. Room 14. Our room. My stomach dropped. At first I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the clerk had mislabeled some security camera outside. But the longer I stared at the screen, the less convinced I became. I refreshed the list 3 times. The device was still there. Active. Broadcasting. I leaned across the bed and shook Hannah awake. "What is it now?" she groaned. "Look." I turned the laptop toward her. "Do you see that? Cam 014, that's our room number." She rubbed her eyes. "Mark, it's nothing. Some router, I don't know. You're going to ruin this whole trip. Or protect you from something you don't want to see," I snapped. That got her attention. She sat up, frowning. "What are you saying?" I didn't answer. I was already scanning the ceiling, the corners, the air vents. Something felt off. My eyes landed on the smoke detector above the bed where the girls slept. A faint red light blinked from inside. I climbed on a chair, my hands trembling. Hannah whispered urgently, "Mark, what are you doing? You'll wake them up." But I didn't care. I unscrewed the cover, and my heart seized. Nestled inside was a small black camera, no bigger than a matchbox. A tiny lens pointed down at the bed. "Oh my God," Hannah breathed. They were watching the girls. I yanked it out, nearly crushing it in my hand. My pulse hammered so hard it felt like my chest might split. I grabbed my phone and started recording everything. Evidence. At the front desk, I slammed the device on the counter. The clerk's pale face drained even further. I don't know what this is, sir," he stammered. "Maybe another guest left it." "Mounted into the ceiling?" I barked. "Don't insult me." He looked around nervously, lowering his voice. "The manager, he won't want trouble." A chill ran through me. Trouble. That one word told me everything I needed to know. We should have left right then. My gut screamed at me to pack up, load the car, and drive until dawn. But Hannah froze, shaking, and the girls stirred when they saw our bags. "What's happening?" Sophie asked, her voice tight. "Nothing you need to worry about," I lied, stuffing clothes into a suitcase. "Dad?" Lily whimpered. "Why are we leaving?" I forced calm into my voice. "Because this place isn't safe. That's all you need to know." We carried the bags out into the freezing night, our breath puffing in clouds. That's when I saw him, a man standing by the stairwell smoking. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. When our eyes met, he flicked his cigarette into the snow and disappeared into the shadows. Hannah clutched my arm. "Mark, please, let's just go." I nodded, but my hands shook as I loaded the trunk. When I slid behind the wheel, I glanced in the rearview mirror. A van idled at the far end of the lot, headlights off. I started the car. Snow crunched under the tires as we pulled out. The girls huddled in the back, whispering. My heart thudded with every mile. But after only a few minutes, I saw headlights appear behind us. The van, closing in. "Dad?" Sophie whispered. "They're following us." "Just hold on," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "I've got this." The road twisted through dark woods, the snow thickening. The van's beams cut through the rear window, closer and closer. Hannah tried calling the police, but the signal dropped, the phone screen blank. Panic clawed at me. I pressed the accelerator, the tires slipping on ice. For 10 minutes, the van stayed glued to us. Then, just as suddenly, it veered off down a side road, vanishing into the night. We didn't speak until we reached the main highway. The police station in Cork was warm and fluorescent, but it felt no safer than the motel. An officer with tired eyes listened to my story, nodding slowly. I showed him the camera, the footage I'd taken on my phone. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sir, these cases take time. You'd be surprised how often it happens." "How often?" I demanded. "Often enough," he said quietly. "Tourists, cheap motels, hidden cameras. Sometimes it's the staff, sometimes not. But proving who put it there, that's the hard part." I wanted to slam my fists against the desk. Instead, I thanked him through clenched teeth and walked out. Back at a chain hotel near the airport, the girls refused to sleep. Sophie sat cross-legged, flashlight in hand, scanning every corner. Lily cried herself out and finally dozed off beside Hannah. When Hannah slipped into the bathroom, Sophie leaned toward me. "Dad, what if they find us again?" I pulled her close. "They won't. Not as long as I'm here." But in truth, I didn't know. My paranoia was no longer a joke, no longer a burden. It had kept us alive, and it would change us forever. Months passed before the nightmares faded. Back in Melbourne, the girls checked every smoke detector in every hotel we stayed in. Lily slept with her light on. Hannah avoided talking about it, but I saw it in her eyes whenever we traveled. Her trust had cracked. As for me, I checked everything twice now. Sometimes 3 times. People called me obsessive, controlling. I didn't care, because I knew the truth. The thing you fear most isn't always in the shadows. Sometimes it's already in the room with you, hiding behind plastic, blinking faintly in the dark. And the scariest part? Most people never notice. Vigilance is not paranoia when danger is real. Evil doesn't always shout or break down doors. Sometimes it hides in silence, waiting for the right moment. Protecting the ones you love means listening to that voice in your gut, even when others laugh it off. Because safety isn't about ignoring fear, it's about respecting it. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who checked into a roadside motel in the middle of nowhere, but life has a way of humbling you. In March of 2015, I was 32, stuck between a broken engagement and the kind of silence that presses in on you like heavy fog. My townhouse in Asheville had become unbearable. Every corner was haunted by my ex-fiancé's belongings, his leather jacket still on the hook, his shoes by the door, the faint smell of his cologne clinging to the couch cushions. It wasn't just the reminders, it was the memories stitched into the walls. After one last fight that ended with me slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled, I grabbed a duffel bag and left. The Cedarwood Inn Motel wasn't much, just a long row of faded doors facing the interstate, a buzzing neon sign that flickered between Vacancy and Cancy, and a front desk clerk who looked like he'd been smoking the same cigarette since 1982. It was cheap, quiet, and anonymous. Everything I thought I wanted. The first night, I called my sister in Boston. I just needed space, I told her, pacing the worn carpet. Becca, a roadside motel by yourself? That doesn't sound safe, she said, voice sharp with that mix of worry and judgment only an older sister could deliver. Don't start, I snapped, then softened. I'm not fragile. I just need to breathe. Fine, but at least lock your door. Twice. I laughed, even though a small part of me agreed with her. The first 2 nights passed quietly enough. I picked at takeout dinners, flipped through channels on the static-filled TV, and tried to convince myself I was starting fresh. But there were small things I couldn't shake. A man in a baseball cap sat in the lobby each evening pretending to read a newspaper. He never looked up, but I could feel his presence. And one night as I drifted off, I thought I heard someone jiggling my doorknob. By the time I pressed my eye to the peephole, the hallway was empty. I told myself it was just the motel atmosphere. Thin walls, strangers coming and going. I even joked about it in my head, classic horror movie setup. Woman alone in a cheap motel. I tried to brush it off, but the unease stayed with me. On the 3rd evening, when I came back with a paper sack of greasy lo mein, I froze. Taped neatly to my door was a folded piece of paper. My name, Rebecca, was scrawled across the front in sharp, deliberate letters. My stomach dropped. Inside, the note read, Rebecca, I've been watching you. You look even more beautiful in person. Let's meet. DN. I stood there in the rain, my takeout bag growing damp in my hand, my pulse hammering so hard I thought I might faint. How did he know my name? I crumpled the note, shoved it deep into the trash can by the stairs, and rushed inside. I locked the door, twice. Then dragged the desk chair in front of it, heart racing. I tried to tell myself it was a prank. Maybe the desk clerk? Maybe some drunk kids messing around? But when I crawled into the squeaky motel bed that night, the neon light bleeding through the curtains, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone out there knew exactly who I was. The next morning, the sky was still gray and spitting rain. I tried to shake off the dread, convincing myself it had been a fluke. People played jokes. People were weird. I wasn't about to let one note push me back into my old life. But that evening, when I returned from a grocery run, another note was taped to my door. This one was written in jagged, angry script. You ignored me. That was rude. Don't make me come inside. DN. I stood frozen, keys digging into my palm. My mouth went dry. I looked down the long stretch of doors, but the walkway was empty. The buzzing of the vacancy sign sounded louder than it ever had. Hands shaking, I yanked the note down and went inside. I sat on the bed, staring at it, wondering if I should call the police. Finally, I called my sister again. Someone left another note, I said, voice trembling. What do you mean, another note? I found one yesterday. This is the second. Becca, call the police right now. And say what? That some creep wrote me a letter? They'll laugh me out of the station. You're not safe there. Her words lodged deep, but pride held me back. I didn't want to be the kind of woman who ran at the first sign of trouble. That night I stuffed towels under the door, triple-checked the locks, and left the TV blaring to drown out every creak. Around midnight, while brushing my teeth, I heard a dull thump behind the shower curtain. My heart lurched. I yanked it open. Nothing. Later, half asleep, I swore I heard breathing near the balcony door. I scrambled up, turned on every light, and found the lock undone. I knew I had locked it. The next morning, my phone charger was gone. I tore apart the room before spotting it hours later, lying on the balcony floor, perfectly coiled, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. I went to the front desk, slammed the note down, and demanded answers. "Has anyone been near my room?" I asked the clerk, a thin man with watery eyes. He shook his head too quickly. "No, ma'am, nobody." "Then how does someone know my name?" He avoided my gaze. "Maybe. The reservation list isn't private. People see it." "Someone broke into my room," I snapped. "That's not just seeing a list." He mumbled an apology and disappeared into the back. I left, fuming, my skin crawling. I wanted to believe it was just paranoia. But the notes, the lock, the charger, they weren't accidents. Someone was playing with me. That night I left every light on. The shadows on the curtain seemed to breathe. I kept telling myself to leave, to check out, to go anywhere else. But I stayed. Part of me was too stubborn. Part of me wanted to catch whoever was doing this. And part of me was too afraid to walk out into the dark parking lot alone. By the fourth night, my nerves were frayed to threads. Every sound made me flinch. The hum of the heater, the footsteps of strangers on the walkway outside, even the rattle of the ice machine down the hall. I slept in fits, clutching my phone like a lifeline. It was 2:30 in the morning when I woke to the slow creak of the closet door opening. My breath caught. The room was dark except for the flicker of neon leaking through the curtains. I sat up slowly, straining to hear. A shadow moved across the wall. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone and slipped off the bed, heart pounding so loud I thought whoever was in the room could hear it. My fingers shook as I dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" I whispered. "Someone's in my room. Cedarwood Inn, room 203. Are you in a safe place right now?" I crept toward the door. "I'm trying to get out." The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady, pulling me along. "Stay on the line. Walk quietly. Officers are on their way." I eased the deadbolt back, wincing at the tiny click, and slipped into the hallway barefoot. The cold air stung my skin, but I didn't stop until I reached my car. I crouched behind it, whispering, "He's inside. I know he's inside." Those 12 minutes waiting for the police stretched into an eternity. Every headlight on the interstate made me jump. Every rustle of wind felt like footsteps. When the patrol car finally pulled in, lights flashing, I nearly sobbed with relief. 2 officers went into the room while I stood shivering by the car. Minutes later, one of them emerged, face grim. "He's not here," he said, but the balcony door was open, and he hesitated. We found footprints, muddy, from the shower across the carpet to the closet. My stomach lurched. I clutched the car door to steady myself. "He was hiding in there," the officer said softly. "Waiting." The words hollowed me out. I'd been right. Every instinct, every chill, every second of unease. It had been real. I spent the rest of the night at the police station, wrapped in a thin blanket, answering the same questions over and over. Did I see his face? Did I hear his voice? Did I recognize the handwriting? No, I kept repeating. No, just the notes, just the man in the lobby. Baseball cap, pretending to read the paper. They nodded, scribbled things down, but I could tell from their faces they didn't expect much. He was gone, slipped away like smoke. By morning, I was too exhausted to cry. The motel refunded the rest of my stay. The police promised extra patrols in the area, but I knew they couldn't guard me forever. I checked into a chain hotel downtown. Bright lights, security cameras, keycard elevators. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. But even there, the paranoia followed me. Every knock on a door, every stranger in the hallway, every creak of the floorboards made me jump. A week later, I got a call. The police had reviewed surveillance footage from the motel. There he was, the man in the baseball cap. He wasn't reading the paper, he was watching me, following me with his eyes every time I crossed the lobby. But the tape ended there. He had checked in under a fake name, paid cash, no trace of him since. I remembered his face vaguely, like a dream you can't quite catch. Familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I couldn't place it. A stranger, and yet not. Months passed, but the fear didn't. I moved into a new apartment, one with deadbolts and security cameras, but the habit stuck. I checked every lock twice. I opened closets before bed. I never left my balcony door unlocked, not even for a minute. Friends told me I was overreacting. He didn't hurt you, they said. He's gone. You're fine. But they didn't understand. It wasn't the violence that haunted me. It was the silence, the waiting, the knowledge that someone had been inches away, close enough to touch me, and I hadn't even known until it was almost too late. Sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I still hear it. The faint creak of a closet door opening in the dark. And I lie there, frozen, listening, praying it's only memory. I've always hated the open road at night. It goes back to when I was 13, the night my father was killed on Highway 64. He had been driving home from a late shift, hit by a drunk driver who drifted across the yellow lines. They told me it was quick, that he never had a chance to even hit the brakes. But for me, the image of headlights exploding across the dark has lived in my chest ever since. A wound that never fully healed. Even after 16 years, I can't drive a lonely road without glancing into the rearview mirror more often than the speedometer. That's part of why I found myself at the Highland Rest Motel on that November night in 2011. I had driven down from Nashville to see my mother in a little town outside of Chattanooga. She'd been sickly lately, thinner, her voice tired, her laugh quieter. She tried to hide it, but I saw through her. My brother called from Denver once a week, but it was me who made the drive, me who sat at her table while she pushed food around her plate. When I left her house that evening, the sky opened up. Sheets of rain hammered the windshield, wipers fighting a losing battle. My plan had been to make it all the way home, but the truth was exhaustion pressed against me heavier than the storm. My mother's frail smile clung to me, and I kept thinking of my father, of that crash on a slick road. I pulled off at the Highland Rest because it was the only vacancy I'd seen for 20 miles. The sign flickered in red and blue, buzzing weakly against the downpour. Inside, the lobby was small, smelling faintly of mildew and coffee that had sat too long on a burner. The clerk barely looked at me when I slid my ID across the counter. He was young, maybe mid-20s, his hair slicked down like he had just come in from the rain. His eyes darted between me and the window behind the desk as if waiting for someone else. "Long night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Always," he muttered, handing me a key card. "Room 12, around the back." That was it. No smile, no small talk. Just a quick glance over his shoulder like he had better things to do than notice me. I tried not to care. Motels like this weren't built for charm. The room was plain, faded curtains, a comforter patterned with flowers long out of fashion, a heater that rattled to life with a groan. I called my brother before bed to let him know I was safe. "You and those scary stories," he teased. "It's just a motel, Rach." "You weren't there when Mom called crying," I snapped. "You didn't see her barely able to stand at the stove. Don't make jokes." His voice softened. Okay. Just be careful. And don't drive tired." I promised I wouldn't. But the truth was, I lay awake for hours listening to the heater clank and the rain fade to silence. I thought about my father, about headlights cutting across the night. When I finally drifted off, my sleep was shallow, uneasy. The next morning, I loaded my bag into the car. That's when I saw it, the SUV. Black, tinted windows, engine humming low. It sat at the far end of the lot, away from the other cars. I hadn't noticed it the night before, but I couldn't shake the feeling it had been there, watching. The SUV wasn't unusual on its own. People travel, people park. But the way it idled bothered me. The exhaust puffed faintly in the cold air, but no one got out. No door cracked open. Just the hum of an engine, steady as a heartbeat. I caught a glimpse of movement behind the glass, a shadow that leaned forward, then back again. My stomach tightened. At checkout, the clerk slid me my receipt with the same indifference as the night before. I hesitated, then asked, "Busy night?" "Not really," he said without meeting my eyes. "Just you and a couple truckers." I wanted to ask about the SUV, but something about the way his jaw clenched stopped me. He seemed jumpy, like he knew something but didn't want to share it. I left instead, telling myself not to overthink. By late afternoon, I was back on Highway 64. The road stretched straight and narrow, hemmed in by trees stripped bare for winter. The storm had passed, but the pavement still glistened with dampness. For a while, it was just me and the hum of my old sedan. Then I noticed it. Headlights behind me. At first, they were distant, just a pinprick of light weaving through the trees. But mile after mile, they crept closer. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. A car on the same road. Nothing more. Still, I eased the wheel, watching the glow swell in my rear view. I passed a sedan pulled onto the shoulder with its hood propped open. No driver in sight. The sight made me press the gas. A memory of my father's wreck flickered in my head. The twisted metal, the flashing lights. The headlights behind me grew brighter, then too bright. They filled my mirror, until I had to angle it away. Whoever it was, they were riding my bumper, close enough that I could make out the grille of the car, the shape of its hood. My hands tightened on the wheel. I slowed, hoping they'd pass. But they didn't. They stayed fixed behind me, tailing every move. That's when I saw the second car. Up ahead, parked diagonally across the road, lights off, blocking both lanes. I slammed the brakes, heart leaping into my throat. My sedan skidded, tires squealing. Behind me, the car slowed too, cutting off any retreat. My phone buzzed in my lap. My brother's name lit the screen. I answered, my voice breaking. "Something's wrong," I whispered. "They're boxing me in." "Call 911, he shouted. "Don't stop." Before I could respond, the doors of the car ahead flew open. Figures spilled into the road running toward me. Instinct took over. I yanked the wheel hard right, jerking the car off the pavement. Mud splattered across the windshield as I barreled into the shoulder. Branches snapped against the glass. I pressed the accelerator, praying the car wouldn't stall. Shouts rang behind me. Then came the crack of gunfire. The rear window shattered, glass raining across the back seat. I screamed, ducking as much as the wheel allowed. My heart slammed in my chest. "Rachel, what's happening?" my brother shouted through the phone. "Gunshots," I gasped. "They're shooting." The car fishtailed, tires spinning in the mud. Somehow I forced it forward, dodging tree trunks by inches. The forest thinned and the car bounced back onto the road half a mile later, suspension groaning. I glanced in the mirror. Headlights. They hadn't given up. I tried everything, speeding up, slowing down, swerving into side roads. Once I killed my lights and pulled behind an abandoned gas station, heart pounding as I crouched low in the seat. For a moment I thought I'd lost them. Then the glow of headlights swept across the lot, finding me like a spotlight. I slammed back onto the road, tears streaming down my face. My phone had no signal. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare of asphalt and trees. On a narrow bridge, one of the cars pulled alongside. A window rolled down. I saw the silhouette of a man, his arm lifting. Something glinted in the moonlight. I swerved hard, the car screeching against the guardrail. Sparks flew. My shoulder slammed into the door. "Why me?" I screamed out loud. "What do you want?" No answer, just the shadow of the man aiming at me again. The roads blurred together, a tangle of curves and long, empty stretches. I had no idea how long the chase lasted. Minutes felt like hours. Every bend felt like the last. Then, by some miracle, my phone lit up with a single bar of service. I dialed 911, my voice cracking. "Please, help me. Highway 64, near mile marker 42. They're chasing me, shooting at me." The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. "Stay on the line. Officers are on the way. Can you keep driving?" "Yes." My words broke into a sob. "I don't know how much longer." As if on cue, the cars behind me slowed. Their headlights dimmed, fading into the distance. Within minutes, they were gone. Just like that. I didn't trust it. I kept driving, knuckles white on the wheel, until the red and blue flash of troopers lit the road ahead. I pulled over, collapsing against the steering wheel as they surrounded me. One officer crouched by my shattered window. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" "No," I whispered, shaking. They tried to kill me. They inspected the car. Bullet holes marked the trunk and bumper. Mud streaked the sides, glass littered the back seat. "You're lucky," the officer said grimly. "Most folks don't make it out when they're boxed in like that." Lucky. That word stuck with me as they escorted me to the patrol car. Lucky to be alive. Lucky to have outrun them. But why me? Out of all the cars on that road, why had they chosen mine? I couldn't answer that question, not then, not years later. The police never found the vehicles. No witnesses came forward. The motel clerk said he hadn't noticed anything unusual. The case drifted into silence, another unsolved terror along the highway. But I never forgot. I moved apartments twice in the years that followed, chasing safety like it was a place I could reach if I just locked enough doors. I refused to drive at night. Even in daylight, I caught myself checking the mirrors every few seconds, convinced headlights behind me meant danger. Therapy helped a little, but the dreams never left. Dreams of glass shattering, of headlights flooding my vision, of voices in the trees. What haunted me most wasn't the chase. It wasn't the bullets or the near misses. It was the memory of the SUV in the motel lot. Black, tinted windows, engine idling. Watching, waiting. Because I knew, deep down, they had chosen me before I ever left the motel. What happened to me taught me something I wish I'd never had to learn. Danger doesn't always announce itself with a scream or a shadow. Sometimes it waits quietly, patient and steady, until you're too far down the road to turn back. Trust your instincts. Notice the small details. If something feels wrong, a car that lingers, a face that doesn't belong, an engine that idles too long, it probably is. I survived because I didn't freeze. But survival shouldn't have to be about luck. The world has dangers we can't always see, but awareness can be the difference between becoming a story on the news and living to tell your own.